the code review slash code showing for the final project Mars Expedition setting up base parameter 8T3. So first off, I want to state that I kind of got a lot of the project's inspiration comes from actually the previous project, which was the Project 4 Mars Expedition landing on Mars. So that's why you see the same code from that project in here, because I just thought it would be neat to implement that code into the final project, just add more to it. So first off, you have the introduction, which welcomes the captain, and this gives a also an introduction on what the program's supposed to do and its purpose. Over here you have the status report on the spaceship, which should report back on how many seats there are, whether the drone is available, the force field capacity, and the model of the spaceship, which is all ran through a if-else statement for the drone. Then over here you have a status report on the spaceship weapons, which would report on, or should report on, the ammunition, the weapon model, the type of ammunition it has, and whether if that type of ammunition is available through a Boolean variable. And below that is a status report on the base stats, which gives a status report on the energy level, oxygen level, base force field, and whether if the base rover is available through a Boolean variable and ran through a if-else. Then below that is a status report on the crew. So over here, it should essentially print out the names of each crew member, the roles they have, their suit condition, and their kind of like health condition. And this is really all from here, which involves with the array and inheritance. And below that, this is where now the actual objectives of the final project is supposed to be met, I suppose. Over here you have a status report on the dormitories, which will give you a report on the name of the pod, the color, the entry code, the set temperature, number of beds, number of bathrooms, number of showers, construction duration, and the construction status, or in which phase it's at. And then, over here we have a recall to the dormitory method, which I'll show and get more into as the video goes on. Over here you have a status report on the cafeteria, which should report the same as the previous class, with the name, color, entry code, temperature, number of stations. Or, well, that's actually different, but it does report back on the number of stations, number of tables, and then same as the previous one, the duration period of the construction and the which phase the construction status is at for the cafeteria. Over here you also have the status report on the laboratory, which will print out on the status of, well, its name, color, entry code, temperature, duration, and status. And also back to the cafeteria, there's another recall to a method of the cafeteria axis, which I'll get more into. Back here in the laboratory, there's another recall for a method for the laboratory. And over here you have a status report on the command center, which, same as every previous pod, prints the status of the name, color, entry code, temperature, and whatnot. And this one also has a recall method to the command status under the command center class. Over here you have the report storage of the storage then, which should report back on everything as previous pods. Nothing really different from that, except that it has its own recall to its own humidity method, which I'll get more into. And then over here you have the conclusion. And over here you have, just as the previous project, the project for Mars expedition landing on Mars. Is just this is used to process the information of the names, roles, suit condition, and the health condition of each crew member, and to put out a report status on each member. So let me. So with all these other, so there's a lot of classes from the previous project. So I'll probably only have to show the actual classes needed within this project. So first off, start off with the dormitory. Over here you have a bunch of declared variables. Then you have the constructor for the dormitory, and below that you have the variables, the public variables over here, equaling to the proper item within bounds of the parameter of the constructor of the dormitory. Then over here you have the method dormitory water system. So essentially this will be used on telling the user if they want to turn on the water or no longer turn on the water. And if also over here, if the user does want to turn on the water, it will give an option stating if you now want to turn the water off, because you don't want to keep the water running on. And then let's see, next class is the cafeteria. Same as usual with the dormitory, you have your public variables, the cafeteria constructor with the public variables equaling to the proper item in the parameter of the constructor. And then over here you have the method cafeteria water system, which is just like the water system method for the dormitory over here. On whether if the user says they want to keep the water running, the water will run. And once the user says they don't want to, if the user no longer wants water, then there'll be no more water. Over here you have a method for the cafeteria status system. So this is used for if the user wants to open or close the cafeteria, essentially. And also once the cafeteria is open, it'll give the user the option to close the cafeteria once they're done eating or doing whatever they're doing at the cafeteria. Then here you have another method, which is the cafeteria meal and cleaning system. So I decided to put the functions of preparing meals and cleaning up and put them into one big thing. So over here you have so essentially what this method would be used for is if the user wants a meal prepared, the method will print out a statement stating, would you like a meal prepared? If the user says yes, then a meal will be prepared and ready. And then it'll ask again if by chance it wants another meal prepared. And once the user says that they no longer want any meals prepared, then it'll prompt the user to ask if they want to now clean the cafeteria now, or maybe wait later for maybe other crew members who might want access to the cafeteria later down the road. And then, so yeah, it asks if they want to, if the cafeteria should be cleaned up now through a bot or later. And this is used for if the user states that they do want to clean up the cafeteria, then they'll type yes in the prompt, and this will give the status on how clean the cafeteria is, and this will essentially state that the cafeteria is clean. Unlike this one, this would state that the cafeteria is dirty. And over here is just the if statement on if the user doesn't want a meal prepared at all. And then you have another method, the cafeteria axis. So this is used for over here. If I go back to main, go to cafeteria. So over here you have that method. So essentially what I decided to do is that method essentially has a switch system implemented. So essentially first off it'll ask the user, would you like access to the cafeteria? access to the cafeteria system. If the user inputs no, then program will keep on running. But if the user inputs yes, then it will display this menu system for the cafeteria access. And essentially, if the user types in 1, then they'll get access to the water system in the cafeteria. If the user types in 2, then they'll have access to the cafeteria status system. If the user types in 3, then the user will have access to the cafeteria meal and cleaning system. And if the user types in 4, then they'll exit out of the cafeteria access menu. And yeah, I decided to put this through a switching system since I just felt it was more optimized method of doing this than through a bunch of if-else statements. Then the other type of pod, the laboratory, over here. So over here you have declared variables, the constructor with variables correlation to the items in the parameter. Over here you have the method laboratory security status system. So essentially, first they'll prompt the user to say whether they want to open the laboratory. If the user inputs no, then program just keeps going on forward. But if the user inputs yes, then it'll ask for their security level. And essentially, if this is also running through a switch system, so essentially if the user wants access to the laboratory, they now have to input their security level. And if the user types in 1, then they'll have full access to the laboratory. If the input types in 2, then they'll just have partial access to the laboratory. And if the user inputs 3, then they will have no access to the laboratory. And if the user inputs 4, then it'll just exit out of the laboratory security access menu. Then the command center, where is that? Oh, there it is. Same as previous classes, variables, constructor here, variables correlating to the appropriate item in the parameter of the constructor. Over here you have the com status method, which essentially will prompt the user if they want to open the command center. The user inputs no, program just keeps going forward. If the user inputs yes, then the program will ask the user to input the captain order number. And essentially, if the user puts the right number, which is 501, if they put in that number, then it'll state that access has been granted and the command center has been opened. But if the user does not put the right number, so essentially puts in any number that isn't 501, then access will be denied for them and the command center will not be open for them. So essentially, the captain has access to the command center because they have the security level number for it, which is 501. And then the final pod, or class, I suppose, is storage over here. Previous classes, public variables, constructor, the public variables correlation to the items in the parameter constructor. Then over here you have the humidity method. So once this method is recalled, it'll prompt the user. First it'll give the user what the current humidity is, and then it'll prompt the user whether they would like to change the humidity. Put in no, then that should actually just be the end of the program for now, since there's no more other stuff that the program has to print out. But if the user inputs yes, then it'll prompt into another switch system I implemented. So if they typed yes, they want to change the humidity, then the program will ask, would you like to increase or decrease the humidity? And if the user inputs increase, then the program will go through the increase humidity process of the code, which it'll ask by how much would you like to increase the humidity, and it will only accept numbers that is less than 100, because you can't really have humidity percentage over 100. and it will then state that it's increasing humidity, and then it'll display the current humidity, which is the variable current humidity plus the humidity number change, which is the variable value dependent on what the user inputs. And on the other hand, if the user types in that they want to decrease humidity, it's same thing as the previous one, as the increase, except it'll, instead of adding two numbers, it'll just subtract the two numbers. It'll subtract the current humidity from the humidity number change, which is the number that the user decides to input. And or also, there's also the option of, if the user doesn't want to change the humidity at all, then they could just type in exit, and the program will just prompt up that you're not changing the humidity, and that should actually be all that should be printed out of the program. So if I were to run this thing, so as you see, gives a hello, and then it states the purpose of the program, then starts giving the report status on the spaceship, report status on the spaceship weapons, report status on the base stats, report status on the crew with their names, roles, their suit condition, and the health status that they're in right now. And then here's the crew status for the dormitory. It states all the information out, and then it prompts the user, do you want to turn on the dormitory water? If I put in yes, then it'll state turning on water, and then it'll give you the option, do you want to continue running water in the dormitory? And then I could keep putting yes, and it'll keep doing it until I put no. Then it should, it'll state that water is being turned off in the dormitories, and then it starts giving the status report on the cafeteria, prints out all the information here, prompts the user, would you like access to the cafeteria system? Put yes, and then it displays which would you like access to, and then you can either type 1, 2, 3, or 4. I'm going to type in 1 to access the water system, and then say, do you want to turn on the cafeteria water? I'll say yes, and then I'll put a no to turn off the water, and then it'll loop you back into the cafeteria system menu. So I want to put in 2 to open or close the cafeteria. State here, is the cafeteria available? False, do you want to open the cafeteria? Yes, and then opening the cafeteria. Is the cafeteria available? True. Do you want to continue having the cafeteria open? No. And then I'll close the cafeteria. And then type 3, you'll have access to the meal and cleaning system. Would you like a meal prepared? Yes. Turning on CookBot, preparing a meal. The meal is ready. Would you like another meal prepared? No. And then, is the cafeteria clean? False. Would you like to send cleaning bot now? Yes. And then it'll state turning on cleaning bot, cleaning cafeteria. Is the cafeteria clean? True. And then the cooking bot will turn off. Then if I put in 4, it'll exit you out of the cafeteria access system. And then it'll give the report status on the laboratory, prints out all the information here. And would you like to open the laboratory? Yes. Please enter your security level. Put in 1. It'll state welcome to the laboratory, and it'll state the 2 people who have access. That it states the names correlated to the security level. So it'll state the captain and the scientist who has full access to the laboratory. If I input 2, then it'll say welcome to the laboratory, and then it'll say the crew member Jenny, who's a doctor who only has partial access to the laboratory. It states here, is the laboratory open with partial access? True. Same with back with typing 1, is the laboratory open with full access? True. If I put in 3, is the laboratory opened? False. And then if I put in 4, it'll leave you out of the loop system from that, and it gives you the report status on the command center. It states, would you like to open the command center? Yes. Please enter the command order number, which is 501. And then it'll state access granted and command center has been opened. And finally, it'll give a report status on the storage, prints out all the information here from the constructor. And then, would you like to change the humidity? Yes. And then, would you like to increase or decrease the humidity? Increase. By how much would you like to increase? Let's go by just 10. And then, boom, as it states here, the current humidity was 60%. And then once I asked to increase it by 10, then it says it's increasing humidity and states the current humidity, which is now 70%. And I could decrease it, or if then once I type exit, it leaves and says that you're no longer changing the humidity. It kind of gives here the conclusion of the program, saying that status report is complete and to have a nice day. And that is all for the code review / code showing of the final project part 1, Mars Expedition setting up base parameter 8T3.